I struggle with anxiety. I have an anxiety disorder, like a lot of people with ADHD do. And I've really well accommodated my ADHD at this point. So the things that I'm noticing I'm still struggling with are really anxiety related. Let me introduce Dr. Sharon Saline, an expert on ADHD and anxiety.
I'm excited to have great conversations about my favorite topic, and you could say my best friend, anxiety.
I think I've had an anxiety disorder most of my life. It's kind of been a constant companion for me and just is always
Mhm.
kind of there in the background to the point that when I don't have anxiety, it feels weird. And I thought it was harmless, but it was actually Dr. Saline that explained that untreated anxiety can lead to depression. There are actual issues with having
Mhm.
anxiety besides being stressed out all the time.
In a way, it is a friend because when anxiety is present, I know that something is amiss. Either I can't manage, or I don't believe that I can manage what's going on, or actually something is amiss, or it's sort of an overreaction or catastrophizing of what's going on.
I didn't realize that it was an issue, I guess, because it was just always present, kind of like my
Mhm.
ADHD for a long time. But the
Mhm.
insidious thing about anxiety is it's so self-reinforcing. Whereas my ADHD,
Right.
I'm like, okay, I don't want to forget the thing again. I just keep doing it. Anxiety is like, but I'm helping. Like,
Mhm.
because you were anxious about that thing, you were able to do it. But it feels like sometimes the anxiety comes out of the ADHD. Like the anxiety developed as a kind of a protective mechanism of like, I did make so many careless mistakes that now I'm anxious about that.
So what happens to a lot of people with ADHD or people who are neurodivergent is, we start out in our childhood, we're just doing the best we can, and then we get these messages. Oh, you missed this. Oh, you're too much. Oh, you forgot this. These messages build up over time into a vigilance where instead of being able to be present, you're asking yourself, when is the next time that I'm going to do something wrong or I'm going to forget something? And we see this also with people who've lived with trauma. Like, when is the next time I'm going to do something and then I'll be in trouble for some reason I didn't know about? We have to, if we're talking to adults, really understand that this pattern of anxiety developed naturally as a coping mechanism to help you avoid, any kind of potential obstacles or humiliation. But over time, it gets bigger. And what happens is that we don't pay attention to the ways in which we are succeeding because anxiety is very skilled at erasing memories of success. And then our anxiety continues to grow. So, anxiety is experienced cognitively, and there's the emotion of fear that's thrown in there as well. So, it's the trifecta. And so, what happens is that we have our physiological brain back here that keeps us alive, heart rate, breathing, etc. We have our emotional brain here. That's the seat of the limbic system, the amygdala, also the hippocampus for memory. And then we have our thinking brain right here, the prefrontal cortex, which is the seat, sort of the director of the brain. So, what happens with anxiety is that people have mind, body, and emotion experiences. So, our senses pick up something in the field. And before we can even cognate it at all, these senses send this information to the hypothalamus, which basically, if there's any sense of danger, sends a message to the amygdala, and the amygdala gets revved up. It basically takes over running the brain. And the thinking brain kind of goes to the Bahamas for a little bit, and the amygdala is running the show. And when the amygdala is running the show, it's a wild experience. What we have to think about is how we can slow down the process of when the amygdala starts to take over. There are two types of worries that lead to anxiety: productive worry, and it's worry about doing things that can be really motivating, and then poisonous worry, which is worry about things you can't control and is debilitating. We want to notice that reaction because we're not going to eliminate the worry. People say, how can I get rid of my anxiety? I say, you can't. It's how you're wired. It's kept us alive for centuries and centuries and more than that, millennia. We want to learn how to turn down the volume on the noise of the worry, right? So we're going to have to step back and see how the anxiety is operating. So first, we're going to identify bodily signals that let you know you're feeling a little triggered. What are those? They're different for everyone. For me, I get a little tightness in my chest.
It's usually in my stomach. When I was in high school, I remember like I had a lot of digestive issues because of the anxiety that I was constantly feeling.
When you're in a social situation and you know it makes you a little bit nervous is to slow down. Just try to focus on one thing at a time. I think it would also be great to come up with a phrase for yourself when you've done something that's impulsive and you're like, "Whoops, I did it again," or something like that, so that you can laugh with yourself about it, so that will relax other people around it too. If people with ADHD want to manage their anxiety, then they have to start with self compassion because we're upset with ourselves that we have this. So, how do we create self soothing? Okay, the first thing is make a list. What are things that you do that make you feel better? Is it exercise? Is it just stepping outside, listening to music, cup of tea, whatever it is, take a hot bath, do some yoga? You can go on and on. What is your list?
'Cause in the moment, I think we just have our go-tos, and if I haven't already thought about it, I'm not going to be able to think about it in the moment because my anxiety is too high. This combines with the emotional impulsivity that people with
Mhm.
ADHD have, where we feel something and we have that raw reaction and we are reacting before we have really time to think about it or slow down.
We all make mistakes, but we have to treat ourselves with the perspective that everybody makes mistakes. And that's the thing we have to really think about is that we're all doing the best we can with the tools and resources we have available to us in a given moment. And sometimes we're going to blow it. Like that's just part of living. It's just that when you feel like you blow it more times than not, then we get into that sort of catastrophizing thinking instead of like, oops, this time I blew it, this time I didn't. I keep a journal at night and I write down a few good things that happened every day. By just writing them down, it's interesting because I can go back and look and be like, wow, actually, good things happen all the time. What I would say is like, what does failure mean to you? Is failure mean you have to ask for help? Then you're going to fail for sure. But if failure means you're going to get something wrong sometimes, then you're definitely going to fail. I would try to reframe it and then we can deal with some of the standards of perfection that you're holding yourself to.
You just named it. It's the standards of perfection because that's what it really is.
Mm.
It's like what if I let somebody down? And that is my perfectionism.
I have a client I worked with, and she said, I want to go to sleep, but there are these little voices in my head that are saying, nah, 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 nah. What if you can't sleep? What if you can't sleep? And then I can't sleep. And I thought, oh, yeah, there you go. That's what it's like. That's one set of those recurring thoughts. The second set is, oh my God, I have these things that I need to do that I haven't done. I want to remember them. In those cases, what I recommend, and I actually do this myself, is keep a pad of paper next to your bed and do a brain dump. With younger kids, I call it a worry motel. My friend, Dr. Ted Plimpton, taught me this. So you can take a shoebox, decorate it, and then, like write your worries to pieces of paper or drop them in the shoebox. Most adults are like, let me just get this out of my head. And then in the morning, you can decide which of the ones you want to pick up.
What about the failures? The like, oh God, I'm gonna fail at this, I'm gonna fail at that, where you just start catastrophizing
Then you
everything.
have to do the what if one at a time. This is that part of metacognition that we have to understand. We are engaging in a what if process to avoid something. What's underneath? What are you really afraid of? Because the brain, all of these what ifs just clutter up the brain.
I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to manage. And I think with especially with ADHD, you have had situations that did overwhelm your ability to manage, that did overwhelm your ability to cope. And so they feed into it.
That's what, your worry says to you. You can't handle it, which is why you have to have a statement that says, actually, in this situation, I was worried and I did these things and I did handle it.
I know that there's been some mixed research on this, whether or not stimulants actually increase anxiety.
That's exactly right. There is mixed research. It depends. And I wish I could say it was a one size fits all kind of a recipe, but it's not because people have different responses to their medications. And so for some people, taking a stimulant can help reduce the anxiety. And for other people, it does the opposite.
So I've noticed my anxiety is better if I'm on meds, but not if my meds dose is too high. So
Mhm.
it really does depend, but it's also dose dependent and it's also specific medication dependent. So some medications, some stimulant medications, I am more anxious on than others. One of the nice things about stimulants is if you try them, they're out of your system really quickly. So it
Mhm.
is something that if you wanted to experiment with, you could and see. And if the anxiety is is too much, then you go, okay, that's not the right medication for me. If the anxiety is fine, then you can go up a little bit and see how you do, and you try and find a balance.
It takes a lot of trial and error, and people give up. They're frustrated, and it's a frustrating process.
But for those who it works for, it's very effective. So for a lot of us, it's worth it. Thank you so much. This was super helpful. Thank you to everyone who donated as well. Thank you so much for supporting what we're doing. Do you want to say bye, brains, with me?
Yes, I do.
All right. 1, 2, 3. Bye,
Bye,
brains.
brains.
Did you know we have a Discord community through Patreon? When you support the work we do on How to ADHD, you get access to a global supportive community and other Patreon perks. If you'd like to join us, go to patreon.com/howtoadhd.